So thank you again. I have kind of made it my goal in 2022 to make sure that when I say or others say Louisiana Public Service Commission or LPSC, that folks in this state know what that means and how important a body this agency is. As you see, I think they hold the keys to our future. They are an incredibly powerful and largely unknown elected body. And we're going to get into all of the things that they do, and in particular, the things that they have something to say about that impacts our climate and our future. I am, excuse me, I'm the executive director for the Alliance for Affordable Energy. We are a consumer and environmental advocacy organization working largely on the power sector. Excuse me, got a morning frog in my throat. And we work in the New Orleans City Council and the Louisiana Public Service Commission. These are the two bodies that make the major decisions about how much our power costs, where it comes from, how it moves to us, and in many cases, how we can even use it. So the commission is unusual in context because it is constitutionally created. Now, most public regulators or utility regulators in the country do not have the kind of plenary authority and decision-making power that our regulators do. Very often in other states, for example, the legislature can direct the regulatory body to do things. In many places, the governor, for example, is the appointing individual for the commission, whereas here in Louisiana, they are fully empowered, entirely independent, and they are elected by the people. So rather than being directed to do anything, in fact, if they are directed to do something, they kind of get their heckles up and very jealously protect their jurisdiction, and have been known to sue the legislature if they feel the legislature is encroaching on their jurisdiction. And they do a lot of things. So they regulate, and I'm not going to read the document here, you can see it, but they have a lot to say about all kinds of things, including the profit margins of our utilities. And those utilities are not just the power sector, it's also gas and telecom and private water. Now, not to be confused with municipally owned water or publicly owned water systems like we have here in New Orleans, which is not municipal, but is a publicly owned entity. They also approve resource acquisition. So let's say a utility wants to build a new power plant, or a utility wants to contract with a wind farm. These decisions are approved by the Louisiana Public Service Commission. They also make various policies. So for example, if you want to put solar on your rooftop and you live on the North Shore, or you want to have access to energy efficiency programs, and you live in Harahan, it is up to policies created and implemented by the Public Service Commission that says, if you are able to do it, how you are compensated for those various resources, and they lay out guidelines for how utilities are required to acknowledge and credit those resources. And then they also set rates for prison phones. Now, my focus is largely about the power sector, but this is really very important for a lot of people in our state. As you know, we have a high incarceration rate, and the Louisiana Public Service Commission sets the rates for how expensive it is for a family to stay in contact with their incarcerated family members and loved ones. And so this is a really important part when we think about criminal justice and protecting people, both families of incarcerated people and the the opportunity to maintain those relationships. So we think that this is incredibly important because those costs are astronomical, and it sits at the feet of the Public Service Commission. So as you can see here, and this is the new map based on the newly drawn lines based on the recent census, there are 5 districts, and the districts are based on numbers of population. So it's why you see there's a teeny tiny one, which is District 3 in terms of space. But when you look at the population size, that number, or that space, which includes part of Baton Rouge, Cancer Alley, and a piece of New Orleans, is all very population dense, whereas most of the rest of the districts are not so population dense. These terms are 6 years. Now, when we think about what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said about how long we have to really address and deal with the realities of what we're doing to our planet, 6 years is the ball game. We absolutely have to do incredible things within the next 6 years. Keep in mind that the Public Service Commission, very often, these seats, once there is an incumbent, it's common for people to go unchallenged, which means that somebody can be in that seat for 12 years, as our current commissioner in District 3 is, and no one has had a thing to say about the fact that there is an individual sitting in that seat that's making life and death decisions for people when it comes to the cost of energy. And no one has had eyes on it. There's not been a lot of accountability. And so this is one of the reasons we think it's really important that there be people running in these races and are aware of these seats. The differences among the commissioners in how they do their work could not be more stark. In Louisiana, the commission is considered, or rather the seat is considered, a part-time job. There is no other regulatory body in the country that is paid as if it is a part-time job and that is considered as such. So in Louisiana, the commissioners make $54,000 a year. In the rest of the country, for the most part, it's about double that. And commissioners really, as a result of that in Louisiana, treat the job as largely a part-time gig. And so some of them treat it as a very hands-off sort of laissez-faire issue. And some of them are a little bit more engaged and direct their private staff to be more engaged. Some of our commissioners are doctors. So for example, Commissioner Craig Green in District 2 is an orthopedic surgeon who takes Public Service Commission work meetings in the conference room at his surgical center in Baton Rouge. We also have attorneys and independently wealthy people on the commission, as well as an insurance salesman. So it's a really broad scope of what kinds of folks it draws. And then within the commission itself, there are dozens of staffers, largely attorneys, and then some economists and so forth. And then there are administrative law judges that hear when there are administrative hearings it's different than in New Orleans, where a hearing officer just sort of calls balls and strikes on opposition and so forth. The administrative law judge really issues a legal perspective when it comes down to it, which then the commission can use in their decision-making process. So there are 5 commissioners I've mentioned. There are 2 up for election, those 2 red circles. I mentioned already that District 3 is the district that includes Cancer Alley. District 4 is the district that includes Lake Charles, Cameron, Calcasieu parishes. those areas of our state that are really exploding in terms of chemical, LNG facilities, and a new power plant. What you're looking at here is really the two districts that hold the vast majority of greenhouse gas emissions are in these two districts. The vast majority of GHGs in our state come from these two parts of our state. And so this is also where the bulk of our power generation is in the state, within these two districts. Obviously, this is incredibly important for the future of our greenhouse gas action to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions. These two seats hold an awful lot of power. The other thing that's important here is that these seats, while they don't get a lot of visibility in terms of media, in terms of, as I say, people even knowing what the Louisiana Public Service Commission does, they are considered steps to higher office. So Kathleen Blanco, for example, she was a public service commissioner before she became governor of our state. Huey P. Long began as a commissioner back when it was called the Railroad Commission in Louisiana. And very often folks who are sitting commissioners are running for some other office. So for example, Commissioner Campbell, who is currently in District 5, you may remember in, I believe it was 2016, maybe more recently than that, he was running for state Senate seat, not state Senate seat, US Senate. This is in part because these seats, again, there's very little oversight, not a lot of people paying attention to the commission. And the people who are sitting in these seats make decisions that are worth billions of dollars every single year. And those are not just decisions that are billions of dollars of value for the utilities. They are also that for the industrial customers that use the bulk of the power in our state. Our industrials are the demand, both in terms of capacity and electricity, energy, for the bulk of that energy in our state, and also therefore have a lot to say and put a lot of energy into how much their energy will cost, because it is a major input to their bottom lines, and where that power comes from, especially more recently, as a lot of these large industrials that have a huge greenhouse gas footprint are looking to reduce their scope 2 emissions. That is, they are looking for renewables.
You sent me that. I started patching.
Am I missing something? Oh, hey, Forrest.
Hi, I did not know I was not muted. Apologies for the interruption.
That's okay. Good to see you. So like I say, these two seats, or rather the Public Service Commission has a lot to say, and these two seats are incredibly important when it comes to our greenhouse gas emissions. And all 5 of these seats are really powerful when it comes to accepting campaign contributions from not only the utilities they regulate, but also those industries that rely on them for low-cost power. Now, some people who run for Louisiana Public Service Commission, including Forrest Bradley Wright, who's just jumped on, who has run in the past, have not accepted those campaign contributions from utilities. But all of the currently sitting incumbent commissioners not only have accepted those campaign contributions from utilities, they've accepted the bulk of their campaign contributions from the utilities they regulate and from the industry that is in their district. So I've said a lot about this so far, why it is that the commission is so important. They set those utility rates, which we are all paying, that are outside of Orleans Parish and that are not municipally owned utilities. So that means, for example, many of you know that the New Orleans City Council sets rates and policies within Orleans Parish, but it's important to know that District 3, which is the one that includes part of New Orleans, Cancer Alley, and part of Baton Rouge, It's actually 60% of the electorate for that seat is in Orleans Parish. And so while the commission is not making decisions about Entergy New Orleans costs, the decisions that they make about our transmission system obviously impact New Orleans, as we saw last year during Ida. We depend on a lot of the decisions that where power is flowing into our city. And so while the electorate is largely in Orleans Parish and the commission is not making decisions about our electricity and gas costs, their decisions are making a major impact in our city nonetheless. I mentioned they can approve or deny all resource acquisitions. We have been advocating for well over a decade for an energy efficiency program that could touch everybody in the state, not just the very small paltry programs that exist right now. They made a decision back in 2019 that deeply devalued the residential and commercial rooftop solar for new solar customers, which means if you live outside of Orleans Parish and you put solar on your rooftop, right now, as a result of a decision at the commission, the value you get for the solar, the energy that you put onto the grid is about 1/3 the value of that same power in Orleans Parish. This is a huge hit to the solar industry in our state. And to the people who want to have that energy independence and want solar on their rooftop for themselves. And so this is something that the commission made a decision about and could change if they decided they wanted to encourage more renewable energy in our state. They also have authority over intrastate oil pipelines. Now, this is something that they have frankly declined to develop rules around. This came to our attention as a result of the Bayou Bridge pipeline. You may remember a number of years ago, there were landowners in Louisiana who suddenly were experiencing pipeline builders exercising eminent domain over their land without having any forewarning, any knowledge in advance of it. And that's largely because the Louisiana Public Service Commission had never created rules that required that kind of transparency in advance. And so this is something that we have been encouraging the commission to create. It actually fill in the blanks where they have the authority over these intrastate oil pipelines. Some major things that we are thinking about right now, I mentioned that energy efficiency program. Louisianans use an awful lot of electricity, and these numbers are actually getting worse. I point out here that Louisiana residents use 30% more electricity than the average American household, 30%. Unfortunately, since that number, which is a few years stale now, since I wrote that number down, it's gotten worse. And that's in large part because there are energy efficiency programs in most of the other states that are pushing that trend in the other direction. Whereas Louisiana residents, as it gets hotter, as the climate is warming, we're just experiencing more energy waste. And so we have a real need to finalize these energy efficiency rules. We also have a lot of high storm costs that we're starting to pay now. If you're an Entergy Louisiana customer, you've seen an additional $10 to $15 charge on your utility bill starting this month as a result of the costs of just a handful of storms, not even including all of Ida. So just looking at the costs of Laura, Zeta, and Delta, those costs are already showing up on bills, and Ida is still to come. And so the commission is making decisions about how those costs are apportioned. And you may have heard some news about one of the commissioners, Commissioner Campbell, asking Entergy if they would share in some of those costs, which would be very unusual, but would relieve some of the impact to ratepayer bills. And then one other thing that's happening right now that's really important is integrated resource planning. So every 4 years, the investor-owned utilities and now the cooperative utilities are required to look 20 years into the future and make decisions about how they intend to serve their customers for the next 20 years. And they do that based on various assumptions, including how much do we think the cost of a new gas plant is going to be? How much do we think the cost of solar will change? And how much do we think the cost of the fuel for existing power plants will be? So, for example, what do we think is going to happen with the cost of natural gas? Well, it's pretty volatile. And so, unfortunately, right now, we are in a position of having to point out to regulators and utilities that the utilities are not using a fair assumption about the cost of natural gas. Right now, the cost of that gas during this last year, and I think I may show you another slide about this in a moment, the costs have doubled and tripled in some cases for natural gas. And that's largely because of LNG exports and the use of natural gas as a feedstock in a number of our industries in our state. And so it's really driving the cost of electricity up because we're using so much natural gas for our power generation in the state. And so integrated resource planning is incredibly important when we're looking at how the utilities will select resources going forward. So I mentioned that we're using an awful lot of gas. Look at this. Louisiana uses 71.3% of our generation fuel mix is from natural gas. And so as the costs of gas have spiked in the last year, that is really showing up on bills. And I know, for example, I'm an Entergy New Orleans customer, and I received a letter just on Friday alerting me to the fact that because so much of our power comes from gas, that I should expect a boost in my utility bill for the foreseeable future. This is exactly what we were pointing out beginning at least in 2015, that if we continue to put all of our eggs in one fuel basket, it makes us incredibly vulnerable to those volatile international markets. And so all the more reason that we need to be moving to renewable energy and energy efficiencies that don't depend on those fossil fuels, not only because they're harming our planet, but because they are really dangerous for our pocketbooks. I also wanted to point out here, both of these images are from the report that came out from the Louisiana Governor's Climate Initiatives Task Force just earlier this year. And these three items that look like little pillars are what the task force referred to as the 3 pillars for their plan to decarbonize Louisiana. Now, 2 of them are very dependent on the Public Service Commission. That's because renewable electricity generation is entirely dependent on whether the Louisiana Public Service Commission moves or requires more renewable energy in our state. That cannot happen from the legislature. The legislature can create things like tax incentives or other programs, but they cannot mandate renewables in the way that the Louisiana Public Service Commission can. Industrial electrification will depend on having clean, renewable electricity to serve that industrial electrification. So you see these two of the 3 pillars are intimately connected to the Louisiana Public Service Commission and the decisions about where our power resources will come from for the foreseeable future. So what can you do about it? What can GNOICC do about it? I mentioned already that 2 of 5 of those districts are open this fall. Qualifying is in July, and the jungle primary, if you will, is in November. And if there is a runoff, that would be in December. Districts 3 and 4 are open this year. And then in 2024, District 2 will be open. And so you can get out the vote. You can engage everyone you know in what the Louisiana Public Service Commission is and does, and you can share information. I'm happy to share with you this slide deck so that you can share it with your other networks and groups. In the meantime, you can also call, write, and fax your public service commissioner about things like the energy efficiency rule. Really lean on them to finalize that rule and to move toward more cost-effective energy solutions than just another natural gas power plant. You can write letters to the editor. I will tell you that, unfortunately, our I hate to call it the paper of record, but the Advocate and NOLA.com, which are have the highest readership in South Louisiana, they don't report much on the Louisiana Public Service Commission, which is partly why not a lot of folks know what's going on over there. But they will print letters to the editor. And the more people who respond to the few articles that the Advocate does publish as letters to the editor, the more the Advocate will understand that people have something to say and want to know more about what's happening at the commission. There's also always public comment at their monthly business and executive meetings. Public comment is to be associated with items that are on the agenda. And you simply put in a comment card when you get to the meeting. This coming meeting will be next week, and it'll be in Baton Rouge at the Galvez Center, the Galvez building right downtown. And then there's always formal engagement, and GNOICC may decide you want to do that. I know that the group is a formal intervener in the resilience and storm hardening docket in New Orleans. You can do the very same thing at the Public Service Commission and intervene in various dockets. And I'm happy to send you templates to support that if you're interested. And you can also become an interested party. It just means that the difference between an intervener and an interested party is formal status. Interested parties will receive emails and information about what's happening within the docket, but you won't receive, for example, the opportunity to access confidential information. And as an interested party, you won't have a say in negotiations if that's what's happening, and you won't have an opportunity to submit formal comment. But they're both incredibly important roles to play, because we want the commission and the various parties that do intervene to see that there are more people paying attention. That is what accountability is all about. And so I will stop there. I'll just leave this slide up for a moment for folks to capture my email address. If you'd like to email me, I'm always open to answer questions. And you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and you can sign up on our website for our newsletter. We send out at least one newsletter a month. And we really like to make sure that folks have access to information about what is happening at the commission.